Ngisabala le obituary ekababa uNyathi, ngithanda uqala ngesitsho ayejayele ukubana asitsho sisonke ngesithi iphambili lendebele lisemuva. Iphambili lendebele lisemuva. Usitsho ukuthi when a Ndebele man looks at his future, he references it on those that are past. History is therefore an important aspect of the future. Pathisa Nyathi, a man with a rich presence, arise to give a tribute to a Babira man, a man I have known as a father, brother, and friend. I speak for the Nyathi family as a person he considered not as just a friend, but a brother. He was born in Sankonjana, southern part of Kezi, to Menyezwa Nyathi and Mamandlovu on the 10th of July, 1951. He was of Babira stock, born in the Sirumula Lupade line. A very spiritual and intelligent person whose love for humanity and its origins is impeccable. His wife, Elizabeth, preceded him to the other side in 2016. And he did not remarry, but chose to stay committed to writing and research. In page 104 of his obituary, of his autobiography, he says, "The business of making widows is not a pleasurable one," which was the reason why he did not remarry. And he goes on in the same paragraph and says, "The sun is glowing brighter for me and more beautiful for me because it is about to set. Therefore, getting married will not be a wise idea." Allow me to divide the account of his life in a couple of stages, about 4 of them. He is brought up as a learner in Salvation Army Corps-run schools of Sankonjana, right through up to his upper level training at Waterloo and Mazowe, all under the training of the Salvation Army. And he grew up in a neat traditional setting where Ubuntu was supreme and the spirit was prepared for both earthly and heavenly service in a very deliberate manner. Pathisa told me in our many conversations that his father taught him to connect with nature, deal with the spiritual, and seek knowledge. Pathisa was to be an avid learner and finally an educationist of note before his departure from the sector in 2004. He spoke fondly and always excitedly of the time when he was a teacher, during which time he met his wife at Loreto, through to the time he was at Glock Range School, where his disciplinarian activities were very clear. That's where he would rightfully straighten out people as he guided them. He spoke fondly of the manner in which he worked with other people right through the educational sector. Pathisa Nyathi went on in his early education experience. He went on to meet luminaries such as Mayford Sibanda, Mthandazo Ndema Ngwenya. He also met, at his time, bigger luminaries such as Ali Mazrui, Professor Ali Mazrui, and Ngogi Wationgo. He was saddened, though, as he left the sector, not in such a wonderful manner. He speaks of it in 2004, and in his writing, if you read his book, he says, "Then I was vomited out of the education system in 2004. As an educationist, he left a very indelible mark amongst the people. It was not a very sad future from education. As he said, it was a baptism into a better life, a time where he says the Kamina Kawena period was going to be translated to Kamina Kamina. In other words, at that point, he was just working for himself and not for any other person. He was working for himself and not for any other person. This ushered in the stage of his life as a historian and documenter of note. He excelled in this, covering both family and clan history. He wrote the histories of many families, and as well as the histories of the nations of Zimbabwe, especially the movements and the transformations of the people of Amandebele. There is no other Zimbabwean writer who has covered political luminaries in the manner that he did. Ubaba uPathisa wabhala phose amabhuku angamachumi amabili ebhala ngabantu abalwela ilizwe lethu ukuthi likhululeke. Ebhala ngendlela ezizwisiseka ebantwaneni. Akula omunye umuntu eZimbabwe eyedwa owacubungula wabhala ngabantu abenkululeko langesikhathi senkululeko njengobaba uPathisa Nyathi. He also wrote about general people. His biographies that he helped write included those of Alvord Mabena, right through Phineas Makurane, Chuma, and others. Pathisa was also a creative, in which life he participated in the arts and poetry. His written works, which are creative, are over 60 in number, and they are well able to be used in any circumstance for education. The third stage of Pathisa's life was him as a philosopher, a thinker, who analyzed life and what you and I would consider ordinary with the critical eye that opened the hidden world with clarity. Nxa ngikubeka ngesindebele ngizakubeka ngalendlela. Siloba uPathisa silahla amanzi etoilet. uPathisa akhafule lami ngikhafule. Silahla amanzi. Omunye wethu asebesuza. Unyathi akhangele athi, hayi ungethuki itamasana. Izulu nxa linetha liyaduma. That was Pathisa for you. You look at ordinary things, and out of those ordinary things, he brings out a very strong philosophical outlook. We'll be sleeping after a long journey together, and he wakes up in the middle of the night, shakes me up and says, did you see what I saw? I said, no, but I was asleep. Asabe sithi yena, ungalala, ufile. Kodwa ekufeni kwakho, bona, ungacimezi. Ngoba, irada isebenza nxa ulele. He helped me understand how to deal even with my dreams at times, because he was very, very apt in waking up and recounting what he has seen. Just a few days before he died, as we were talking, I'm saying to him, we still have work to do in Zambia. And he says to me, Mbangazitha, umfula lo othuleyo engubonayo sesizawuchapha. Ngithi sesizawuchapha ulobani. Uthi ngibonile ngilona sikhanyisile sizihambela sichapha umfula omuhle. At that time, I was so concerned. You know, at times you know a person, but then you are so concerned that he gets better, you don't hear his words. And that was Pathisa for you. Pathisa was a spiritual scientist of Pan-African and global propensities. He is recorded as having started off in Oxford by explaining the Stonehenge, which is a feature, a stone feature in the United Kingdom, and explained it using Afrocentric elements. And one of the archaeologists at Oxford then said to him, how do you know this being an African? And that is an Oxford University. And he says, we see and we understand those things that you don't quite think are possible in Africa. He started off as a geography teacher, and his first degree was in geography and science. And our question has always been why, until Professor Ali Mazrui answered and said, geography is the mother of history. And in Pathisa's life, I have understood it. What he saw in geographical formations, he would explain and bring out in philosophical thought and historical accuracy. In Zimbabwe, I can safely and proudly say he outdid his peers. He was very close to people because he would learn from a person. UPathisa wayengafika abe nguyoqala ukukhuluma, wayefika thule abangani kalalelanga, kodwa bese ubona esebhalile ukuthi ubelalele. There is no single person who wrote as many and as broadly inclusive political historical accounts like Pathisa. There is no cultural historian who has gone beyond the boundaries of class and tribe as Pathisa did. Pathisa said, lizahlupheka mashona lidinga uchaminuka eMashonaland. Uchaminuka alisoze lamthola eMashonaland. Uchaminuka usemntwini okhuluma isiNdebele. I didn't believe him until I went to Mrewa as we were researching on the Mbira. And these people in Mrewa, bachaya Mbira ubusuku bonke kwazi kwathi khona phana ngabo 3 ekuseni. Omunye wasevakatshelwa ngabakibo. Thina sasicabanga ukuthi uzaqalisa ukukhuluma ngesishona ngempilo. Kodwa uthi elaphana eselele phansi akhulume ngesindebele. Emrewa, hayi edolobheni leMrewa, emakhaya eMrewa. Sesisodwa uPathisa sebesithi even the Shona will not understand why they are having problems with their people speaking isiNdebele when they get spiritual. Because the line that divides these two is very thin and almost non-existent. We are one. That was Pathisa for you. He has carved his own niche among the greats of African thought and science. If you have ever listened to people like Aubrey Machiki of South Africa, Credo Mutwa, also of South Africa, you will then understand why Pathisa explained the symbols of Africa, the chevron, because there is no other person that has explained it like as well as he did. We stand today and celebrate the children, uSkhanyisile, uButho, Lofigile. When they selected this casket, it was very clear that they were looking out for what he wanted: communion with nature. So when you see his casket, lizabona amaxolo ezihlahla ngoba yikho ayihlala la. Hamba kahle Sirimula, hamba kahle Lepade, Taria Tokwana, Bajanama Bausimela, Boma Wodudu Ababirwa, Masandema Reperepe Adiho.
Growing up in Esankonjane become men. Not all men from Usendo to Romula become writers. Not all writers in my country become icons. Not all icons are iconic. Not all icons are legends in my country. And not all icons are iconic enough to become martyrs in Africa. Not all martyrs in Africa become the light of their nations and the source of identity, Ubuntu, pride and culture. Many become self-wasted materials, and more become materials wasted by those hungry for power. Lina Besilo, we gather to celebrate a material of excellence, a manly man, a fatherly father, the heroic hero, a legendary legend, a luminary, an iconic icon, a martyr of Pathisianism. Ibumba le Nyathi elimpondo simakhekenene, an oasis of perfected unapologetic wisdom, a fountain of uncompromised knowledge, a minefield of linguistic plethora of wealth. Yes, the most down-to-earth servant leader in our house of hunger. A selfless fine specimen of humanity and honor, an obedient messenger who executed his mission with passion and perfection. A messenger. From him, above and those below. As above, so below. Tina wabulawayo ubuqhawe asubuqoqodeli. Tina wabulawayo ubuqhawe asubugideli kongonya. Tina wabulawayo ubuqhawe asubukhothela amathezinja. Abuqowelelwa hlezi sixakelele isiko. Ingwele, ingquphunga, ingqungqulu izolalela distantly. Lapho kulele khona uLukhawuthi uvuma indaba mafela masuku. Khonale kaNyathi. Lapho kulele khona Adam Stikandlovu. Khonale kaNyathi. Khona ngale kulele khona amaphepho seyiso magagulo Raman. Lapho Middleton. Khona ngale kaNyathi. Nkunzi abayilwisa baqhamuka iPathisa yagcigcizwa yagweba. Yambisa indunda yathunda ibheke esigodlweni. Bayivuma bezizweni bayinikeza umlandu. Mlobi olwazi luthophela okonyosi zegone zolomthwebebe. Hawu lesizwe ntikadika njula ntebele ntele ziyazwe mbuthi wethu mqoqi mhleli wendlela yesintu ngithi yobuciko obungcwethi lobungqavithi obungelandiswe khehla kithi isiphala sobuntu izike lesiko inkezo yabangani wena mbongolwane yabokhekhe okwakithi ngokwezandla ngitsho baba kungokwezandla ngesizathu ngabe ngokwenyawo ngabe sisabhekisa amabombo sidabula khona siselapha sidabuka khona thina siyisizwe sigaxa ubuntandane amathuna bobaba yimgodi yebhalakho lemlotha yemkhonyeni asazi sothethela sithini yes sibuyise kanjani tata isiko lisehlule nanku lobile ukungafundisa ingwalo tata yikulala ngawa izolo sibhodla indlala silele ngabomvundla Tata, Situe, the chevron, the secularity and the perpetuity of existence. Look, is a picture of Lamtaje. Sipilaga Kulu, Garira Tata, Ulava Bangabu Futulu Benze, Lalamtanje, Locus Sida, Sisasula Pansi, Locus Sida, Bona Sevesuti, Sipilaga Kulu, Kayes of Makafita, Sichebang and Siva, Sinata Sebekoliwe. Sinatamanza bakezenga wameshalembonya tata tina sakhela khona echebechebeni lebahlabathini lebhukwini bona bakhele khona amanqulu mangaka yes bagwabelana amasima kithi sasala sibambo ngaphansi sakhele khona emahlabathini wamagenga lamathuna lamhlanje silahlekelwe sinqunu sihlulukele siflathele sikwele magadi ahlabayo we Pathisa sikwele magadi ahlabayo Nyathi emidwayidwa yes ngokuhlanhlatha ngemjula mqondo iphenda indlela yavitshwa yaxubana izizwe ezimithanithani tata usebenzile baba sisizwe esiziqhenya ngezolo ilamuhla isehlule ikusasa ivoza ikhoba umlilo wekhankela imahanghangu akasekho uPathisa umphathisi sesisele sijamile nje zwi bantu bakithi selele uSoromula esasekhona samtshaya indiva sasidlala igwini ngaphansi kwesihlahla singasibona ubude baso namhlanje sikemile sibamba ngaphansi namhlanje sichedile isihlahla umthunzi du sesibamba ngaphansi intaba idilikile umthombo uchile isibane siphela iparafina sisakhanyisile emkulwini kagogo incwadi ivaliwe asisayikuyifunda sile sikundigidi kukhumuka umhlathi wekhubu kukhumuka umhlathi wekhuba sisathi siyakofola akusenani sesiyokhula lokhula ukhula lisiqedela amanzi some qha umhlaba wome kere isiko soliphendula ngubani kaSoromula udlulile mdala thina besihamba sikhudula inyawo ngezafesana asazi soyibuza kubani indlela kulabo sebedlulile tata ngeke sisababamba kuthi kulabo tata abayazi indlela kuchathama labayana tata bayitshaya phambili bayitshaye emuva batshaye phambili imbebebe seziyokiliza uselele utata umlondi womlando opheleleyo wesizwe mina ngesaba ukuba likiliwa nensimini yezimbulu mina ngesaba ukukilizisa indebele mdluli sodlodloba laphi mina ngesaba tata ngesaba ukwephula amazilo mjipha sothimba njani mina ngesaba ukukhombela ongakhonjelwayo ngifinyele ngibe ngangomuthwa isiko solufunda phi Nyathi mina ngesaba ukutsho ongaqanjwayo hlezi sichachambe siphethuka indebe zami ngife ngipika ngigqoke zami mina tata ngesaba ukufinyelela ukungasafinyelela abaphansi ihambile network yesintu mina tata ngesaba ukunyathela amathuna wonke samile umntankomo mina tata ngesaba sokumnyama isiba nesicithile igoma ligcwele ubhima amanyathela nyomukile izwi lichile okufa kusixhophile kufi wasakaze belisehlisa asazi amagula sizowagcina loba sizowaphahlaza na sokugonqeme tata sokunqumile sokuyakaza sithini tata sokusheshe kwajiya lokho sisele sinqumo size singembethe lutho sigqiza ukweyiswa lokubizwa ngamagama asintinyele kwesithela amagula amagungubutha sekasikhanyisiwe asazi imbhalo yakho izasikhanyisela na sekabutholezwe asazi ingwalo zakho ziza kusivikela na baba kafikile asazi sofa asafika ngemfundiso yakho na baba nyembezi olewala kume akume uziqoqe ngeva kwembumbuluzana zamehlo udlulule umdluli njipha wamakhwa seremula wajanama bakusimela sekasikhanyisiwe sekabuthelezwe sekafikile mdala usikhonzele kwabadala kwabaphansi kwelamathonga usibingelelele abaphambili usibongele kuJehova uThixo umvele inqawo umdabula ngcibuli tata wena ohambileyo komkhulukhulu abadala babesithi uNkulunkulu sisele sodwa besihanqile futhi asazi kumbe sizosila Zulu kandaba mahlabe Zulu mthwakazo omhle sizwe sakithi bantu abahle nanzi ingqobe nansi imfumba qaqelani sibone to the Nyathi family awandu umusa alwandu uthando akwandu kubambana kokuhamba izinsizwa kosala izibongo nje kuphela as above so is below hulumende asibambeni njalo
bangiphe umlando ukuthi ngiyethule amazwi ngimele abantwana bakaPathisa noElizabeth sisitsho ukuthi bona batshoni kithi njengabantu ababo so nxa ubala inkulumo zabantu bebonga imisebenzi kaNyathi loPortia omunye udadewethu siyabonga bandise ukuthi wayengumuntu othanda isintu isindebele ethanda ukusikhukhumeza kakhulu lokho wavela wasuka lakho kudala kwesizalo usikhanyisile wahle waphiwa ibizo lesindebele sonke silamabizo esindebele anenkulumo amabizo ankhona sikhanyisile umntwana wokuqala ukutshengisa ukuthi umuzi usulokukhanya wasokubuya ubutholezwe umntwana oqalwe umfana okukhangelelwe ukuthi la uzaqina abambe umuzi usiya phambili wasokubuya uthi ufikile phakathi kwami lofikile kule gap ye 9 years ngothuju so ikotha sefikile angithi ukuthi ongakhangelelwanga kodwa ibizo lakhe litho khona lokho so ubaba wayesebenzisa isintu ukuchaza okusemngqondweni wakhe ngaleso sikhathi sikhula njalo sasithola imibuzo eminingi ukuthi lina abantwana njengoba uyihlo ethanda isiko kangaka ukuthi ngumuntu o strict and tough that was a total contrast to his personality. He was never a disciplinarian. I don't think there's any one of us here who can say wake wachaya ngubaba. It was our mother actually who was the disciplinarian. So he may have projected that tough traditional man out there, but he was a total contrast of that at home. Ngisiya phambili ngibe lethuba lokuthi ngisebenzela a very good 7 years eyaMagugu International Heritage Center, and that ranks to me as one of my best working experiences because we complemented each other very well. Yena wayijule kakhulu esikweni, mina ngiqine kakhulu ku cultural management. So sayisukumisa eyaMagugu International Heritage Center ukuthi zibe lapha ekhona because sonke sananzelela ukuthi lo la lo kukhona lapho aqine khona, and we played to our respective strengths, which is why Yamagugu today has become a beacon of hope, a big educational facility for students across Zimbabwe who want to learn and appreciate our history and heritage. And I'm still in the cultural space, even if I've since left Yamagugu, and I attribute that to the inspiration I guess the expression that says the apple doesn't fall far from the tree rings true in this particular case. It is not an accident that I also work in the culture space. It's not an accident that Fikile works in the publishing space, which is where ubaba wayejulile usisi wami lapha la usebenza ku-environment, which is science. So kulabo ababa lamathuba ukuthi bachazelwe i-history yethu ngubaba, they will know ukuthi many a time wayelinka i-science le-heritage, particularly for instance i-aspect ye-peer proving. There's a lot of science behind. So all of us, one way or the other, we represent elements that he believed in. Of course, we are said to have lost him many a time. I call him, everyone needs a father figure when they're making big critical decisions, you know, on many aspects of life. So it's nice to always have that person who you know will give you their most heartfelt advice. He was indeed a very spiritual man, albeit in the traditional sense. So sikhula eluveve sasingena i-Salvation Army. He would insist that i-church yakibo isankonjana, i-church yakibo is-Salvation Army abakhulela kiyo esankonjana. But funny enough, I never saw him set foot in that church all his life. So ngama Sundays sasivuka sigeze, asidrive ayeschiya e-church abuyele endlini abese uyezosithatha. So yes, indeed he was spiritual, but not so much in the Christian faith. But it doesn't mean that he had no tolerance for Christianity and all other faiths, which is why he struck a very good friendship and relationship with Reverend Tamasani. They respected each other despite their divergent beliefs, which I also believe intersect at some point. So ngizathatha ithuba leli ukuthi ngibale inkulumo ebhalwe ngodadewethu lapha ibhalwe ngesilungu. Father, as I affectionately called him in later years, was a funny man. He was very humorous and would break out in laughter that was contagious. Why is port of umfundisi ukukhulumile? I recall the trips we took together to the farm in Matopo and would talk about anything and everything from politics to the color of human waste. He would come to my house and we chat for hours on end until I start dozing, talking about politics, religion, or spiritual issues. He would share his dreams with me and had such determination to fulfill them. He had such great insights and a fountain of wisdom. I recall he always said, one needs to have plans in place that when you happen to come into some money, you know where to deploy it. Otherwise, the money may go to waste. So, yes, but we'll hold on to the teachings and the inspiration that we derived from him. Then any message, my father, my hero. It may sound too cliche, but I know no heroic man like my father. Growing up with Pathisa Nyathi for a father was both a curse and a blessing. A curse in that for a man like him, he was easy to be scrutinized, and that was always a hard pill to swallow. But as I grew up and saw the energy, love, but most of all passion to do what he loved the most, nothing else mattered. I am grateful to the man that my father was and what he will continue to be in memory. I am grateful for his life, the values he instilled in us. I am grateful for all our inside jokes. That is what will keep my heart warm as I try to make life without him. And then on a lighter note, they say they will miss the moments when they to teach him how to record a voice note, how to retrieve a Microsoft Word document over a phone call. We are based in Harare, some of us, and he would phone seeking assistance on how to download a document. But we find comfort in that we've gained a good ancestor. I will forever cherish all the time we spent together. I will forever carry with me your teachings, and I will forever hear your laugh, and I will dearly miss you. Lala serumula, sepumule, and if I get a chance to become even a quarter chance to be the person you were, I would have done well for myself. I'm sure all of you know what that symbolizes. We will try by all means necessary to preserve and perpetuate his legacy. Those of you abake bafika emagugu and were fortunate ukuthi alichazele ukuthi i-circle le-chevron ichoni, it represented endlessness, perpetuity, eternity, immortality. So he has now adopted another form, but his inspiration and teachings will live in us and among many of you who had the opportunity to interact with him. And then in closing, I want to invite my sister, Uskanyisile, ukuthi athi fahla fahla. When the news broke on Saturday, many of you were in shock. Probably some of you didn't know that he was unwell for a while. But I want to thank my sister who nursed him for many months on end towards his twilight time. Mina lofikile lophoshiya were based in Harare, but nguye udadewethu wayekhona lapha emgijimisa bebona udokotela bengena emathatheyi wasukela uveve wabuye wazohlala laye so ngizampha ithuba lokuthatha ifahlafahla about his last moments on earth. Ngiyabonga.
Salibonani. Ngizehlisa phambi kwenu lonke lokukhokhela ukuphakathi kwethu. I think we got overwhelming responses from people bemangala ukuthi kanti kwenze njani ngoba kuPathisa. I think I will try to summarize his journey lapha aqalisele khona ukugula. So he has been unwell from the 24th of August. Normally I buy his tablets, so ngiyamfonela kuyisabathe ekuseni. And I asked him, i-medication yakhe right yini? Abathi hayi ngiqedile insulin, but namuhla ngivuke kungani iphaphu lami lika left libuhlungu. Ngizizwa ngi-breathless and I'm feeling a bit weak. I was supposed to go to the farm Damasane, but I can't even get to the gate. So senthe anchi. So I realized that maybe the situation is not as good. So I drove home, I picked him up. We went to see a GP, and we are very grateful to that GP. Sasikoma rooms got Dr. Kuzanga, but we were attended by Dr. Bombiro, who took his time to examine him, and ultimately they determined that he had suffered a heart attack. So when he felt the pain, which he thought was a lung pain, he had actually suffered a heart attack. So that was the beginning of a journey that led to his death. So he had been a diabetic patient, also hypertensive. He seemed to recover and cope, but we did discover during that time that he was hospitalized and tests were being done that his kidneys had suffered damage and also had suffered some prostate enlargement at the same time. So these are now the diseases that he was now struggling with. And until he was in hospital until the 16th of September, I took him to my house, we were together for some time, and when he thought he was getting better, and many of you, I'm sure, are surprised now when he lies down, he's being laid to rest today, because they would call me and I would say he's getting better. He did, and he looked like he was getting better. So I was not lying. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened. On the 5th of October, we rushed to Mater Dei Hospital, and the situation had changed completely, drastically. And that day was a very difficult day for me. As my sibling has already said, I am the only child this side. But I am very grateful to Babu Damasane, who, when I told him, Ubaba usesibhedlela, came. And when he was struggling, I was in despair because what I was seeing, you know, all the tales that you hear from housewives, this is what you will see, and all of that. I saw all of that on that day. But until we left him at ICU that day, and that was the time he started dialysis, and then he was discharged, and from there his health just never picked up completely. So I just want to say I am grateful really to Mater Dei staff, because for the greater time they would notice deteriorator corner, and they are the ones that would, in particular, Sister Takawira, who when she saw that today her patient was just not coping, was quick to call the doctor and send the patient to ICU. So I'm very grateful for the alertness of the staff at Mater Dei. And then when he was discharged now the second time, he was unable to help himself, he could not walk. So he had lost ability to walk. So we now had to use a wheelchair to move him around and carry him or turn him on the bed. So that is how sick he was now in his last days. So we're very grateful also to Siletemba Home and Health Center, who afforded us a nurse aide who was very caring. I'm sure the young men must be amongst us. Demis Ndlovu, are you here? Please stand up. This young man, when he first came to the house, I thought, how could they send such a young boy to look after my father? But I was so amazed at the way he was so caring. He looked after my father so well that I had no problems. He was never smelling, he was always clean. And he would make sure I was patient, making sure that he is fed and everything was taken care of. So we're very grateful to the young man and we wish him well wherever he goes in life. May the Lord bless you abundantly and provide for you. So basically, on the last Friday, I was called back from work where they explained that, hey, the situation at home is a bit bad now. So this was now the journey to where he breathed his last on Sabbath. And around 8:30, I got to the hospital. He was still breathing and he was in pain. And I remember when I said, Father, how are you? He would squeeze my hand, just squeeze my hand. Then I went out to sit in the waiting room. When I got in at 10, he was just quiet. I think they started to intubate and everything, but that is the time that the doctors told me, we have lost your father. So around between 10 and 12 o'clock, that is the time when the doctors were begging to save him and keep him alive. But the Lord saw it fit that he rests because he really was in pain. While we may have wanted to continue with him, but I think it would have been very selfish because his last days were very painful for him. Thank you very much.
Sure.
It is such an honor to be here this morning. As hard as it is to speak to and about such a great man as Ubaba Pathisa Nyathi, it is also and must be a celebration because he was a very special human being, one of a kind, a man larger than life in many respects. I've been sitting here this morning, as I'm sure all of you have been, listening to so many people speak about so many different facets of his life, from his family and the dedication that they had to his grandchildren, the obvious intelligence of his grandchildren, who are continuing that tradition, but also all that he did from a professional and national perspective. And so we celebrate that today, and it lifts our spirits. I've seen several people today recently say that his loss to us all is rather like a library being burnt down. But fortunately, it hasn't been burnt down because his legacy will live on. Whilst he was the personification of history, of culture, of tradition, of, for example, indigenous food systems, even an actor, and many other things, fortunately, he used his time on earth wisely. He knew what his role was. And he has left this rich tapestry, this rich legacy through the Amagugu Heritage Center, his over 60 books, his columns in various newspapers, and through that he has created a platform for the future, a foundation. We will all have the benefit to go back to those writings, to see his legacy and to teach future generations about the rich history of people of our nation, but particularly the Ndebele people. And so through that, his legacy will transcend and will enrich generations to come. In the last few days since we've heard of the tragic passing, I think many of us have reflected on Pathisa Nyathi, including myself. I've noticed that we all have reflected on how he was there for each of us, including myself. As mayor, he made time to be there. he shared his thoughts, his experiences, his expertise to anyone who was prepared to engage with him. And I was struck yesterday at his home when we went to pay our respects. What a profoundly humble man he was, despite his soaring intellect, his incredible contribution. He remained a humble person, a person of great integrity. And I was reminded of Proverbs 16. It says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Rather be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. And those ancient words from Proverbs, in many respects, seem to sum up the essence of his character. In one sense, he was lowly of spirit, a humble person. Despite all his achievements, he was prepared to speak to the rich and the poor, the high-ranking and the common person. What a great man. In the last few months, I was privileged to come to understand myself some deep aspects of the Ndebele culture. We opened at the Obituary Center the beautiful artwork done by the ladies of the Matopas. And he spoke of that, and he spoke about the meanings of the circles and the chevrons that so many people have spoken about today. That the chevrons reflect the beautiful female figure that denotes the continuity of mankind, reflected in this beautiful art that we see in the Matopas. And he spoke about the circles reflecting the sun and the moon and the continuity of life through that, the eternity of life. And I was deeply struck by that. I was looking forward to seeing him when we celebrated the 10th anniversary of My Beautiful Homes at Amagugu a few weeks ago. And tragically, he couldn't be there because of his declining health. But we missed him. It was like a void at that occasion because we missed his great soaring intellect and explanations, even for people like me, the uninitiated. And so he has made this amazing contribution to our society. He's researched and written for posterity. And he wrote about so many topics. He has written about the history of our city. He, as we've seen, wrote about key people in our history. I noticed that his book about Welsh from Mabena, amongst many others, people whose lives perhaps would not have been written about, whose history would have been forgotten by future generations, but for his diligence in recording that history. We, as a city, also benefited directly from him. In 2005, the city saw fit to request that he be our public relations officer. And his role in the city was legendary, to ensure that the city's history, that its affairs were accurately conveyed to the public. And he was well respected. When I speak to my colleagues in the council who worked with him, they say how hard he worked to execute his duties before moving on in 2008 to other roles and responsibilities. Despite his advancing age, he continued to develop our understanding of the city. And as late as last year, he spoke of the history of, for example, Makakoba and its contribution to the city of Bulawayo's development. It was dubbed no Bulawayo without Makakoba. And so we see throughout, right to the end of his days, how he kept working, how he kept documenting, how he kept enriching our lives. And so today we lay to rest together a true hero of our city, of Mandela, of Zimbabwe. And on behalf of my fellow councillors and the senior management of the City Council, we extend our deepest condolences to his family, to his friends, to his colleagues. But let us take comfort. Through his writings, in one sense, he is immortal. His writings ensure that the past is not forgotten, that its richness is understood. In a small way, the city wishes to respect that contribution to our society. We have made available this at the theatre this morning, and he will be honoured at Lady Stanley Cemetery. But yesterday, with my councillors, including the Deputy Mayor who is here this morning, we resolved that we intend naming a significant street after Baba Nyathi. And finally, we will ensure that every single one of our council libraries has an Nyathi corner, so that we ensure that his books are accessible and available for future generations. Amagashke, Baba Pathisa, Nyathi.